Welcome to the Mitchell Center for Sustainability Solutions and our Sustainability Talks series. My name is David Hart. I'm the director of the Mitchell Center, which is a great job, by the way. We're very glad you can join us, especially during what are particularly challenging times for many people around our country and elsewhere. So it's my pleasure now to introduce today's speaker, Susan Lessard, who's the town manager in Bucksport, Maine, just down the river where I am right now and across the river in Winter. I'm in Winterport. Sue is, I don't know many people like this. She's a living legend. She's worked in municipal government for nearly 40 years. I first met Sue more than 13 years ago when she was the town manager in Hampden. To me and my colleagues, she became a generous mentor. She guided a group of UMaine students and faculty in learning how to collaborate with towns that are trying to balance economic development and environmental protection. In essence, she put on a master class in teamwork. In fact, that class and that we were teaching and the mentoring that she provided laid the foundation for what has become the Senator George J. Mitchell Center for Sustainability Solutions. And since that time, hundreds of interdisciplinary teams of Mitchell Center students and faculty have worked with stakeholder partners all around the state, and we continue to benefit from great mentors and leaders like Sue. She taught us about the power of partnerships. We learned a lot from her about how to adjust course when you're confronted with setbacks, and she learned a lot about that throughout her career, not the least in Bucksport. If you've ever been there, I was just there yesterday. It's a lovely town, and for as long as most people could remember, there'd always been a paper mill in Bucksport, but that all changed at the end of 2014. Sue was hired as interim town manager less than a year after the mill closed, so you can imagine that the town was reeling with some of the challenge they were facing. There's a wonderful story about this that's a basis for the title of our talk today in Yankee Magazine in late 2018. I'd encourage you to go read it. It's a great story, but Sue is also a great storyteller, and her stories have never been more timely or important. Welcome, Sue Lessard.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be using a PowerPoint this afternoon. Primarily 40 minutes is a long time to talk, and I'm sure you don't want to look at me 40 minutes. So there will be some slides that help me keep my place and hopefully provide some good information on the story of Bucksport. So I'm going to share my screen now so that we can start this program. I want to thank you all for taking the time out of your day to attend this session and to listen to our story. I am honored to be the one telling this story. I have worked in municipal management in 5 very different Maine communities over the past nearly 40 years. I have managed a mill town in Western Maine that underwent a paper mill strike. It was my first manager's job, and it felt somewhat like trying to manage a small war-torn country. My next job was managing a small community that had had a governmental overthrow and ousted all of its elected officials, and all the staff had quit as well. Next was an island 12 miles off the coast of Maine, where I was not only the town manager, but the lighthouse keeper as well. Prior to coming to Bucksport, it was an upscale suburb of Bangor that when I went there had a commercial landfill that consumed every agenda and eventually earned me the title of trash queen of Central Maine before we wrestled that issue to the ground, resulting in the closure of the facility. I came to Bucksport in August of 2015 as an interim. My retirement plan was to help communities in transition, which is really a fancy way of saying communities that had some problems. My job when I was hired, in essence, was to put the wheels back on the bus in Bucksport. The mill had closed. There had been 3 town managers in a 3 to 4 year period, 2 2 of whom had been fired. The community was coming to grips with the loss of the mill and working to identify a path forward. And that is where my journey with Bucksport began. 8 months into my interim status, the interim went away. And I am now in my 6th year with this amazing community. Like many who come to Bucksport, once I was here, I was hooked. 3 years into my tenure, my husband and I bought our forever home in Bucksport. Whether I am the town manager of Bucksport or not, Bucksport is where we want to be. Before we start, I have a poll question to ask each of you, which is coming up on the screen now. If you could answer this, it would be great. So 66% were yes and 34% were no. Thank you very much. I asked this question to better understand my audience. And at the end of the discussion, I will have another question for you. I want to thank you for your help. I want to make this presentation as informative and helpful for you as I can. In journalism, every good story is supposed to tell who, what, when, where, why, and how. I have 2 goals this afternoon. One is to tell our story, and the second is to encourage all of you to think of ways that you can help your communities write their stories. So our story begins. Who are we anyway? Bucksport is a community of approximately 5,000 residents, 4,924 as of the last census, and we are anxiously awaiting the 2020 census results to see how our demographics may have changed. Bucksport has been described as a community with a bit of grit, and we are proud of that. There is respect here for the trades and for people who work with their hands. It is reflected in our continued understanding that an industrial component is not a bad part of the mix for local jobs and valuation. It is reflected in the innovative and excellent school system, which offers students an individualized experience in everything from welding to engineering. And it keeps us connected to our history. But we also have a large arts community, a growing work from home contingent, an expanding business park, Main Street businesses working to stay afloat, family farms, both new and generational, and a large number of entrepreneurs. There are 170 small businesses in the town of Bucksport, and I'm sure that may surprise you because they are not all on Main Street. We are a combination of those from both here and from away, what I refer to as a mixed bag of nuts, who are all working in our own way to help this community move forward. In addition, we are connected in ways beyond community lines with the communities that comprise our RSU 25 school district. The residents of Orland, Verona, and Prospect shared in the mill years with jobs and opportunities and building community, and shared in that loss as well. The artificial lines that separate these communities are overcome by the ongoing connections through our education system, shared utilities with some, and with family connections across borders. The what of our story relates to the 5 components that have made our ongoing rebirth possible: people, planning, partnerships, persistence, and progress. And these will be discussed more in depth in a little while in this presentation. When does our story start? The when of our story is that in December of 2014, the mill town came to an abrupt end when the VERSO company closed its doors and sold the Bucksport mill property to American Iron and Metal, a company whose plan was to dismantle the mill, and sell its components. The closure cost nearly 500 jobs, 279 of them from Bucksport residents. It also caused an immediate loss of taxable valuation of 40% of the town's value. The 80-year history of the mill as the center of economic life in Bucksport ended virtually overnight. Although this was the when of the end of the mill, it was not the end of the story of Bucksport. For Bucksport, it was a new beginning. Where are we? The where of the story is that Bucksport is located on the Penobscot River, approximately 18 miles from everything, from Bangor Brewer, from Ellsworth, and from Belfast, from major educational institutions, shopping, and entertainment areas, and also close to a wide range of recreational amenities. 80% of the Bucksport workforce work within 18 miles of our community. And if you visit our mile-long waterfront walkway, you will find signage that shows our location in relation to many cities in the world. This signage refers to us as the center of the known universe. We prefer to think of it as location, location, location. The why of our story is at its core. Why did we not fold when the mill closed? Why are we making front page news frequently in a positive way 6 years after the closure of the mill? Why are we attracting business and residential development? Why is our real estate market exploding? Why are we so successful in obtaining grants? Why is our school population expanded? An article in the Ellsworth American in 2017 asked if there was something in the water in Bucksport that explained its ongoing rebirth, and suggested that if there was, that other communities should find out what that was and should drink some too. The how of our story involves the efforts, large and small, of a diverse group of people and organizations who care deeply about this community. Local government is one piece of that development effort, led by our tireless Community and Economic Development Director, Rich Rotella. But government is not doing it alone. Without the small businesses who have stayed through the loss of the mill and then the pandemic, and the new ones that have joined us since the mill closure, without the ideas and energy of citizens who have stepped up and gotten involved, without our myriad of community groups, and without the foundation built by the mill years, our story could have been so very much different. Many times you will read the story of some tragedy in the newspaper or online, depending on your generation. Some terrible thing will have happened in the community, such as a mill closure. There will be a lot of attention for a short period. Politicians will come out of the woodwork. The media will be everywhere. And then nothing. In Bucksport, we have worked very hard to stay on the front page in good ways since the closure of the mill. The keys to the story of Bucksport rely on 5 items, all of which begin with the letter P. People, planning, partnerships, persistence, and progress. For Bucksport, the first and most important component of its rebirth lies with its people. The real test of any community is not what happens when things are going well, but what happens when they are not. For Bucksport, the closure of the VERSO mill ended generations of families working in the mill, the end of being known as premier paper makers in the world, the end of the world as many knew it. The loss of the mill and its role as the hub around which Bucksport rotated was traumatic. Watching the mill come down was traumatic. The relative speed with which the mill went from an operating entity to having its parts and pieces shipped out by rail and its buildings demolished was traumatic. Bucksport did not suffer the death of 1,000 cuts that many mill towns experienced. The open, close, sell cycle that kept people dangling at the end of the thread. In Bucksport, it was final. It is fair to say that on that December day in 2014, the world beyond the borders of Bucksport had already decided that Bucksport was done, over. One more in a line of dying mill towns. But a funny thing happened on the way to the funeral. The community mourned the loss of the mill and the jobs it represented, but the people did not give up. The community did not sit back and wait to be fixed or saved from the outside. The people of the community stepped up, got more involved, started businesses, started local festivals, dug in their heels, and started over. Our local poet laureate, Patricia Smith Ranzoni, herself a mill rigger's daughter, garnered a grant from the University of Maine Foundation to collect and publish the voices of the mill, original poems, stories, and songs in a community anthology, Still Mill, documenting the decades of mill workers and their culture, proving that their lives had counted for something important and would be remembered and respected. Proceeds from the book are donated to the local historical society, creating a priceless archive and historical record of the immense contributions that the mill workforce and their families and mill years here had provided as a foundation from which the town could build a future. This fund is dedicated to the location, protection, and exhibition of making paper in Bucksport. From the first news of the mill's closing, people began collecting artifacts as evidence of the world-class art they were part of, and a hunt began for a permanent location for a mill museum. The first public showing was held at the local Alamo Theater in 2019, including readings and songs of the mill by the workers themselves from Still Mill once again. The former mill workers were able to experience the town's gratitude and respect for their contributions to life here, helping to heal their minds and hearts. The effort continues as the Historical Society is seeking a permanent location for a papermaking museum, a major contribution for the state of Maine. The Still Mill project and Bucksport story caught the attention of the editor of Yankee Magazine, Mel Allen, who featured the town in a 6,000-word 2018 issue, saying, "Still Mill will be passed down along with the family Bible." A resident from Bucksport started a weekly Main Street entertainment venue, Wednesdays on Main, that brought music and food and fun to Main Street every week in the summer. Main Street Bucksport was born to support the Main Street businesses, and the town embarked on a 2-year process of understanding what people valued most through its grassroots community heart and soul program, the result of which identified the values most important to the community, created a list of 82 community projects, and increased participation in local volunteer organizations and involvement in local government. In 2017, the town of Bucksport was one of the communities toured by an economic development assistance team composed of representatives from a myriad of federal offices in Washington, D.C. They arrived on a bus on a sunny Wednesday afternoon. Music was playing on Main Street thanks to the Wednesdays on Main program. The waterfront was bustling with transient boaters. Our municipal marina was full, and there was a 180-foot private yacht tied up at the town dock. There was not an empty parking space on Main Street, and the sidewalks had people enjoying the afternoon, many with an ice cream that they had gotten at the dairy port. The meeting with the group was held at the Alamo Theater, and I had the honor of being one of the speakers. You could tell that these people were pretty confused. They came to Bucksport expecting to find empty buildings and storefronts and little activity. Their expressions clearly said, "What are we doing here?" I used a modified quote from Mark Twain to start my remarks when I said, "The reports of our death are greatly exaggerated." It made everyone laugh, but the questions ensued. Why wasn't Bucksport in the same boat as so many other mill communities that had lost their mills? Here, the people of Bucksport engaged in saving their community, and they have continued this heavy lifting in the years since the mill closed. Although the loss of the mill, I believe, increased the sense of community in Bucksport, because for a while it really felt like it was us against the world. In truth, the foundation was already there. Bucksport has a history that predates the mill closure of people working together, of support of their schools and students, of care and concern for the health of the community, and of pitching in. In Bucksport, community is more than a word. It is our culture. The second P in the story is planning. Not long after the closure of the mill, a committee was formed to look at all town services and consider what steps the town should take to absorb the permanent loss of the mill valuation. Should we eliminate recreation, cut public safety, cut public works, sell community assets? The committee came up with a list of recommendations, some drastic and some less so. There was a good deal of discussion about what the best way forward was for the community. In the end, we settled on what I fondly referred to as course corrections instead of cliff jumping. The people of the community had lost enough. They had lost jobs and security and identity. Eliminating programs for their children or the safety of a well-trained ambulance service was not seen as a way to rebuild. Course corrections have involved increased partnerships, department restructuring, staffing efficiencies, and energy-saving infrastructure upgrades. We are in a constant state of evaluation of how we do business. Planning is the major answer to the question regarding our success in obtaining grants. Funders want to know that their money is going to an entity that has done its homework. And that is what planning is, homework, not sexy or fun or high profile, but which provides knowledge about what will or won't work in a community, what will be accepted and what will not. What do we need? What can we afford? Who will do the work? All questions answered through planning. Since 2015, the town of Bucksport has undertaken 6 major planning efforts. The first was its decision to utilize the Community Heart and Soul program as a way to understand what the people of the community wanted, what they cared about most. This 2-year planning effort was grassroots, bottom up, and involved hearing the stories of the people of the community. Originated by the Vermont-based Orton Family Foundation, this effort involved people of all segments of the community. The most important facet of this work was that it was all about the positive, what people liked, and what they had in common. It set the stage for people of very different opinions to share those in civil and constructive ways. The town also updated its comprehensive plan to reflect the loss of the mill, developed a plan for redevelopment of the former mill site in downtown with an EPA planning grant assisted for us through the Eastern Maine Development Corporation. We updated our economic development plan locally, revised our recreation plan, created an AARP action plan to go along with our age and ability friendly community designation, and developed and adopted a marketing plan for rebranding the community. Planning is not new to Bucksport. It is a community characterized by planning. One of the key reasons that Bucksport was financially able to weather the storm when the mill closed was the nearly 20 years of incremental planning for the day that that might happen. Can you imagine the courage it took to talk about planning for the what if of the mill closing? Certainly that would not be a conversation that would have been popular, and there likely were many who thought it was ridiculous. But the elected and appointed officials did their best to try and insulate the town from what they feared would happen in the event of the mill closure. The result of that planning was a fund balance of $8 million, and $2 million of that was used in the first year after the mill closure as a buffer that allowed the community to retain services for its residents while the dust settled. In addition to financial planning, the community also invested significantly in its infrastructure during the mill years. These investments resulted in the mile-long walkway on the waterfront, a large performing arts center, a town-owned and operated marina, miles of hiking trails, exceptional sports facilities, and more. These facilities help to attract people and businesses to our community and provide enhanced quality of life for our residents. I was asked in an interview a few years ago, if I had a crystal ball, how would I see Bucksport in 20 years? My response was that in Bucksport, you do not need a crystal ball. In Bucksport, there is always a plan. You know where you are going. And if something happens to that plan, there was always a contingency plan to go along with it. The third P in our story is partnerships. Bucksport is all about creating connections. The list that you see here are not all of the partnerships that the town has, but they are some of our most important. Our philosophy is pretty simple. The more connections that the community has to help in engaging its residents and in fostering a strong sense of community, the better. Unlike many communities, Bucksport and its school district share as many resources as possible. We contract with them for IT services. They contract with us for the use of our recreational fields. We have gone so far to provide a loan to them for gym floor repair, and the list goes on and on. The Bucksport Bay Healthy Communities Coalition has a 25-year history in the community of working on issues related to community health and welfare. And it serves as the implementation committee for the town's AARP action plan. Main Street Bucksport carries out 4 major local events, as well as assists other organizations with grant writing and business assistance. The Bucksport Bay Business Coalition has stepped up to replace the former Chamber of Commerce. Community Heart and Soul continues work on implementing the 82 ideas that resulted from that 2-year effort. We have so many committees that prior to the pandemic, there had been a quarterly meeting of them all under the heading of Bucksport Next to keep everyone informed about the activities of the others. Partnerships expand the reach of the community, involve more people in the work of the community, and create connections that are so very important. In Bucksport, everyone is welcome at the table. In planning for this talk, another partnership possibility for Bucksport is in real-time connections with the university. When I was the town manager in Hampden, I reached out to the University of Maine and to the New England School of Communications for help with issues facing my community. Students helped train my staff in GIS mapping and IT, and operated our public access channel. Bucksport is not too far away for such connections with the colleges and university in this region. As a matter of fact, Right now, one of our valued partners in Bucksport is working on a staffing plan to segue from their current VISTA volunteer to a part-time employee that might be a perfect role for a university student. The fourth P in our story is persistence. Sometimes things don't work. Sometimes things do not happen as quickly as we had hoped. Sometimes you have a pandemic that tries to derail all the forward progress that you have made. In Bucksport, that just means that we work a little harder. Things that do not work are lessons that we learn from, but not events that make us give up. The pandemic has brought out the best in our community. Before the state or federal government provided any kind of assistance, the town of Bucksport instituted what it called a Pay It Forward program that provided grants to its small businesses and Hannaford gift cards to those who had lost their jobs or had their hours reduced. It provided delivered meals to Bucksport seniors 3 days a week at no cost from April through the end of July. And it provided additional funding to the local food cupboard and to Home Inc., the regional homeless shelter in Orland. It inspired a $60,000 donation from a former Bucksport resident who heard what we were doing and wanted to make our program bigger. Pay It Forward was not designed to solve all the problems. It was designed as a reminder to our residents and our businesses that the town was here to help, that we appreciated the businesses who had taken a chance on us, and that we would help those who had lost their jobs through no fault of their own. The town expended $115,000 on this effort, plus the $60,000 donation. But the goodwill created has a value that it is not possible to calculate. In addition, Main Street Bucksport started a Bucks program that matched gift certificates to local businesses. You buy $10 worth of Bucks, you get to spend $20 at a local business, with the balance made up through fundraising. This program put over $40,000 into the hands of our local small businesses when they needed it most. The final P in our story is progress. And our progress has sometimes been measured in feet and other times in inches. And for us, both are equally important. In the time since the mill closed, the town of Bucksport and its residents have consistently just put one foot in front of the other. In the years just prior to the closure of the mill, real estate sales were slow and prices were depressed. People were reluctant to invest in a community with a mill because so many had and were closing. Right after the mill closed, real estate sales were slow and prices were depressed because people feared that the mill rate would skyrocket and the community would become a ghost town. When that did not happen, and people saw the work that the people of the community were doing and what the community had to offer, that tide turned. And now Bucksport has the lowest real estate inventory in memory. Residential properties sell quickly and demand exceeds supply. The former mill site is now under the ownership of 3 separate companies: Whole Oceans, who plans on locating a land-based aquaculture facility; Maine Maritime Academy, that has opened up a mariner training institute, which will be training up to 2,500 mariners a year from all over the world; and Ironclad, which owns and operates the gas generation turbine and has a contract with ISO New England as a backup to the power grid. We have added 5 new businesses to our business park and received more than $2.5 million in grant funding for planning, improvements to the waterfront, downtown improvements, fire EMS equipment and personnel, solar development, and broadband. The town ascribes to the philosophy that you either move forward or you go behind. and in Bucksport, we choose forward motion. You would be amazed at what can be accomplished if you get a lot of people and organizations all pulling in the same direction. By this time in the story, you must be thinking that I am Pollyanna and that everyone in Bucksport regularly holds hands and sings Kumbaya, which is not the case. Our story is not a fairy tale. And I recognize that the story so far has focused on the characters, the setting, and the plot. And in case you were wondering if everyone always gets along, the answer is no. Our story also includes a good deal of conflict and resolution. In transitioning from what Bucksport was, the mill town, to what it is becoming, involves a good deal of the dreaded C word, which is change. The exodus of the mill brought a whole new set of voices forward. New people moved here. Some mill workers were forced to move away for jobs at other mills. Change became a constant in a way that it had not been before. Change is uncomfortable and sometimes frightening. People are not generally happy or reasonable when they are uncomfortable or scared. In the early days following closure of the mill, there was considerable anxiety over the future. That did not stop people or groups or the community from taking action, but there was an undercurrent of, can we really survive this? Change for us was unavoidable. But one of the key ways in which we have worked to manage the terror that it can cause is to not forget where we came from. There was no attempt here to simply close the door on the mill years. I use the word foundation often in describing what those years meant to Bucksport. Further, like every other community, not everyone in Bucksport thinks the same way, is of the same political party, the same religion, the same color, the same ethnic background, the same sexual orientation, or pretty much the same anything. At the local government level, our primary conflict resolution technique is to get as many different opinions as possible involved on any given topic, have lots of spirited and passionate discussion, and then work to find ways that there can be winners and winners. What we try to reinforce on a constant basis is that what we have in common is so much greater than our differences. And the common thread here is that everyone loves their community for one reason or another. And the word community has slightly different meanings for everyone. As I said at the beginning of this discussion, I had two goals today. One was to do a good job telling our story and representing Bucksport well. The second goal was to get you, the audience, to think about how you can make a difference in your community. As trite as it may sound, everyone's voice is important. I think you probably understand by now what would have happened to Bucksport if its people had given up, sat around and wrung their hands, waiting for the cavalry to ride in. They understood that they are the cavalry, and if there was any saving to be done, it would have to start with them. For Bucksport, this story was triggered by a catastrophic event. But a crisis is not required, and certainly not recommended for any community to need as many of its residents as possible to help it be successful and to have a higher quality of life. To end this presentation, before the question and answer section, I would like to ask another poll question to see how well or poorly I have done in meeting my goal, and hopefully to encourage some of you to take a first step into community involvement. While we're doing the poll, I would like to thank Bucksport Poet Laureate Patricia Smith Ranzoni, former VERSO papermaker Danny Wentworth, writer Jenny O'Connell, and presentation reviewer Deanne Cray for helping me in reviewing my presentation this afternoon and putting it together. 94% of you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. It would be amazing if this discussion provided a catalyst for even one of you to get more involved in your community, but I certainly hope that there are more. Thank you all very much for your time and attention, and I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have. The final slide is my contact information, and if any of you have questions after this session is over, please feel free to contact me.
Sue, thank you so much. This is Linda Silka, and I should be showing up at some point. We all just, I think I speak for everybody in that this was so instructive and so interesting. David introduced you as a living legend, that you really are just help people learn about how to collaborate and how universities can work with cities and towns. And what he had to say was so right. I think there was just so much that we can learn from what you had to say, and just a number of really interesting points. Like, you talked about different towns that you had been the town manager of. One of them, you were not only the town manager, but the lighthouse keeper. Another, you had the informal title of trash queen, you said, which is just so interesting. So if people, we have lots of students that are listening, and if they wanted to become you, what could you tell us about sort of what experiences they should have, or what they should do, or when they should follow you around?
Public administration is the traditional role to public management. I took a slightly different course in that I started out working for a community, the town of Searsport, as a doing economic development and doing the town clerk's job and doing all sorts of things before my first full-time manager's job. And that's an alternative way, but what you really need is a strong sense of caring about wherever you are, and a desire and the understanding that if you do your job well, things can be better. Mill rates can be reasonable. Public services can be good. People can be treated as valued customers and not hostages to services that you can't get anywhere else. I really hope that more young people look. Not a lot of people are going into the municipal management profession. There's a lot of time involved. There is, believe it or not everybody likes government. As a matter of fact, not very many people do on any given day. But at the local level, for the most part, that goes away, because the last thing anyone asks when the fire department shows up because their house is burning is what political party they are. Nobody cares. People help each other because they're neighbors, and again, what they have in common is more important than what they don't. But I would encourage any students who are sort of interested in making a difference. You don't have to be Mother Teresa, but it really is rooted in caring for your community.
Thank you. A number of the questions that people are interested in, which speaks to sort of, I think, things that are going on now, is sort of how how do people deal with conflict there? How did you move beyond the kinds of conflicts that often just lead to things getting stuck?
Um, I don't think that I introduced that to Bucksport, but I've certainly tried to carry it forward. I think that there's a number of answers to that question. Bucksport has a diverse group of people here, and really always had very strong opinions on different, and at the local government level, at least, those are hashed out in passionate ways, but not personal attack ways. Ideas here are different, but they're not good and bad. And the elected officials that I've had the good fortune to work with here have been very respectful of the fact that while they might not agree on a topic, they're respectful about, and that's the tone that's set. And the other thing that's helped with this, I think, is our Community Heart and Soul program, which was this 2-year process about it's all about the positive. It's all through a lens of what you like and what you want to keep. And it engages people, very different people, in very positive ways. And as I said, has there ever been a meeting where people wanted to shout at each other? I'm sure, but that's not the negative doesn't win in Bucksport. I tell people this all the time when we have council elections or we have things, and it's sort of like, why is everyone, why doesn't this reflect the national or the state scene and how that, and because in Bucksport that doesn't win. That isn't what gets you elected, and it doesn't gain traction. Are there negative things that happen? Absolutely, but they don't overtake the rest of the good that's happening. The community standard for behavior is higher than that, and it's from its public officials. And when it doesn't see it, it responds. So it sort of keeps us all behaving, shall we say, as we interact with each other.
Yes, speaking of interacting, one of the questions that appeared on the chat is about how is this all being affected by Zoom? Both what you're able to do and what people are able to do. And do you have any lessons for us in terms of thinking about that?
I think all of us, at least my elected officials, will be glad when we can be in person again. It's an extra step to try and make sure that you're engaging your public. And we use social media and we use our website and as many ways to encourage. We publicize everything. All of our meetings, even if though they have to be Zoom, have an interactive component and people can email in or call in to participate. And looking at our numbers, the number of people who are participating remotely are greater than the number of people that we had who used to show up at our in-person meetings. But it provides for a kind of stilted thing. I worried a lot about this presentation today because I have done a lot of speaking, but generally I can see my audience. You can tell by body language whether you're boring someone to death or making a point. And I was talking to my PowerPoint, so it's kind of hard to tell.
Yeah. One of your P's that's so important is partnership, and you really did, talk a lot about partnership. What's your sense of? You mentioned one example of the schools, but do you see things going on in your community that are really helping young people and youth in the community learn about partnerships and be involved in partnerships?
I do. RSU 25 has recently received a very substantial grant which over a 3-year period is to provide an even more individualized learning experience for students in the school. But our economic and community development director is involved in the schools in not only through his coaching activities, but in interacting with junior achievement and other programs to connect students to our community. He traditionally has an intern from the school that he works with as well, but our youth is our future, and Bucksport and its people are very supportive of their local school system and their students.
One of the things that's also interesting, I think, related to youth and to the community is the ways in which the arts have been involved, and writing has been involved. And the story about the book Mill Years, you know,
Still
and
Mill.
all the way, yeah, sorry about that. It just very, very interesting. And there's now a new book in Maine that is called Milltown, about Mexico, Maine, and is intriguing but different from sort of how Bucksport is approaching kind of thinking about the problem. So when you think about the storytelling and the opportunities there, do you see certain parts of the community coming together or thinking about how do we tell those? You know, you made the great point of, we're not going to forget about the mills. We're going to pull people in and really look at the different kinds of stories. And that was so intriguing. So how'd you go about that? Or how did you decide? How did people decide that's a great way to go?
The storytelling aspect, apart from our poet laureate and her inspiration at the time that the mill closed, to do this as a way of capturing that history in a very personal way through stories, was that Heart and Soul, the program that we went through, is all about learning what people value through listening to their stories. And that the group that worked on Heart and Soul collected hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stories from people of Bucksport in the region, and those stories are what reflect what is most important to people, and create strong positive connections. And but the idea of storytelling is both through Still Mill and through Heart and Soul has carried through here.
That's really interesting. Another question that someone asked is, what's the status of the paper museum? Is that happening? And what an interesting idea.
The local historical society is still in the search for a location, and should, within the next several months, I understand, have some information forthcoming about a possible fundraising effort to make that happen.
I found that an interesting question, in part because I, for 30 years, lived in Lowell, Massachusetts, and worked in Lowell, and the town really did fall apart after the mills closed, and it was a desert. And each town has a kind of different way of responding to that. But now Lowell has the second largest Cambodian community in the country, and has a national park that really is focused on the history and learning in terms of different things. And I think people in Lowell could learn so much from what's going on in Bucksport, and sort of what you helped us understand. And you talked a lot also about the just change as being so uncomfortable for all of us, and it's easy to try to step back. And are you seeing things in your community or in your experience across different towns of how we could all get a little better kind of thinking about change and knowing maybe it's coming?
Well, I certainly don't recommend a catastrophe as a catalyst, because that brings with it a whole other, but conversations about difficult subjects, which is what change represents, that happen incrementally as we move forward, it's the journey is the destination, is what I say all the time. It is a constant, you never get someplace and there you are, because if you stop, you go behind. So it's necessary to have an ongoing conversation, just ongoing work that involves as many people as possible, so that when things have to change or people think they should change, that there's a lot of people involved, that you have access to and good ways of communicating with, so that people don't feel blindsided by why did they change that? There's an open and ongoing conversation. It's a lot of work, but it is really, really necessary, or you get conflict because people feel blindsided by things that happen if they're not part of the ongoing conversation.
Just so interesting. So many people have asked additional questions. How many jobs were lost? What's coming back? People are saying, we've moved there. We're so excited about what's going on in our community. And we're excited at UMaine. We wish we had more time with you now, but we're excited about the possibility of exploring partnerships and how can we do things together. The students, undergraduates and graduate students and faculty, we all want to be helpful and learn together if there are ways that we can. So although you can't hear us all clapping, I think everyone, can we give Sue just a hand that she can't hear? And even though she couldn't see our faces, I know we all look forward to continuing to hear the story and hopefully having a chance to be a part of what's going on. And David, do you have any last minute things you'd like to say?
Hey, Sue, that was wonderful. I echo everything Linda said. There are more questions than we got to. In fact, I wasn't going to say this ahead of time. You shattered our records for participation, which speaks volumes about your important work. And I think this means also that everybody saw that Sue put her email address up. So if we didn't quite squeeze in your questions, please feel free to get in touch with Sue. And Sue will also share all the questions in the chat with you afterwards. Thanks a lot. Great job. And thanks for your leadership.
Oh, thank you very much. I was very honored to be asked, and my goal was to represent Bucksport well.
And you did, for
Thank
sure.
you.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week.